Kia ora koutou, ko Richard Hartram talking here. Thank you all for joining. I will ask Nick, Kristen and Michelle to introduce themselves because they're going to be presenting items during the meeting. So perhaps Michelle, maybe you could start.
Kia ora koutou everyone, I'm Michelle Blake. I'm on the steering committee and I'm the University Librarian at the University of Waikato. And I'm also involved in the Mapping the Research Data Landscape project, which we'll talk about as part of this meeting.
Excellent, thanks. Kristen.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Stock. I'm from Massey University. I lead the Massey Geoinformatics Collaboratory, so I'm a geoinformatics, geospatial science person, and I am the New Zealand delegate to the World Data System, which I will briefly give an update on soon.
Lovely, thank you, Kristen. And Nick.
Kia ora koutou, ko Nick Jones. Nick Jones, I'm the Director of NESI, the New Zealand or National E-Science Infrastructure. I'm also a member of the Research Data Alliance Organisational Assembly, looking at that sort of connection for New Zealand with that organisation. I'll give an update on that later on as well. Kia ora.
Thanks, Nick. So as I said, I'm Richard Hartshorn, effectively chair, I think, or something of this committee. And I am also the delegate to CODATA. I'm a chemist at Canterbury and involved with IUPAC, which is the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. And that's effectively how I got involved in this whole data world. What I'll say in an editorial sense or oversight sort of sense, getting involved in this area has been pretty fantastic for me because I've got to meet a bunch of people who are not chemists and to engage in areas which are new to me and actually very interesting. Nick's put up he's got an agenda slide there and background stuff. So the slide deck is morphing as we go. We've got the agenda there as to the items we plan to cover during this meeting. We'll start with a bit of a roundtable update because one of the key things of the key purposes of this committee is to provide a pipeline to the international data organisations that New Zealand is a member of or that New Zealanders are part of. And we wanted the wider forum to have a bit of a sense of what's going on there. Then we need to talk a bit more about this committee and how it's operating and what next steps are there. And then to get into some of the things that we are doing that relate to the wider sense of data and research in New Zealand, the Landscape Project, and also how we might be able to get together as part of a conference setup so we can actually get to know each other a little better and engage in wider things and maybe come up with new projects. And then by the end, hopefully there'll be some time for some discussion through and about what we're doing as part of any other business and anything that people want to raise. So perhaps you can have a think about if there are things that you would like to raise as we go through the various briefings. I'll speak for my colleagues and say that if you have questions on any of the presentations, feel free to just pipe up, interrupt, and we'll try and address them as we go along. So Nick, perhaps you can run on to the next slide. Thanks. As I mentioned, I'm the New Zealand delegate to CODATA. Because of my IUPAC involvement, I was elected to the executive committee of CODATA, so that CODATA is an organisation that has both national members and members from international unions that are also members of the International Science Council. So CODATA is the Committee on Data of the International Science Council, it is its full name. And so any scientific body that's a member of the International Science Council also gets to be a member of CODATA, hence IUPAC's involvement. And IUPAC was taking a strategic view that data was important to it, and so we wanted to engage with CODATA a bit more deeply. So that's how I ended up there. Next slide, please, Nick. So basically, you can find more about CODATA. Just Google CODATA you'll get it. The key oversight from the strategic plan, these are the main headings of the things that CoData gets into. So a whole lot of stuff around open data and open science and the things that are required as part of that, and some work around data science and building capacity, things like data science schools and similar sorts of things. Shown on the screen there also, there's a link to the decadal program, which is kind of an operational plan for the next 10 years, through until 2030. So it was 10 years when it started. That shows the things that are being put in place as part of the strategic plan. And I will let you all access that at some point later on. And I should say, we'll share these slides to the group as well, so that there's the ability to get onto these links as well. So next slide, please, Nick. As part of that decadal plan, or in part of implementing it, one of the biggest things that CoData is doing is this thing called the World Fair Project. This is an EU-funded project in collaboration with the Research Data Alliance. So Nick may refer to this at some point, or possibly not. The EU has committed around €2 million over 2 years to this big project, which is about making digital standards fair. And it's being done in the context of disciplinary areas that are represented in the kind of flower diagram on the right there. So each of the petals in that flower is an area or discipline in which we're making efforts to make the digital assets fair. I should just check in. FAIR is a very common acronym in the data world these days, saying that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And key parts of that are about setting standards around data, so data standards, and also, very importantly, metadata standards. And what these groups are doing as part of these work packages in the different disciplines is that they are looking at the digital assets they currently have and really looking carefully at how those can be used to build tools that help things become more fair. And one of the key aspects of this project is the fact that there are many different disciplines covered by those petals. And that allows the project to look very, very helpfully at the I part of FAIR, so the interoperability. So making sure that the digital standards that you might have within a domain or discipline can actually be used and accessed by people in other disciplines. So to give an example from the area where I'm more comfortable, in chemistry, you'll be aware that the periodic table is a significant data standard that many people use across many different disciplines. And IUPAC is the body that maintains that through the Commission on Isotopic Abundance and Atomic Weights and other related activities. But the geochemists, for example, are very interested in the details of the isotope abundances and masses and so on. And we need to make sure that the electronic systems that we have, or the digital systems that we have around the periodic table and the things in it, are fully accessible and interoperable with the sorts of things that the geochemists might be wanting to do with it. So that provides an example of how the World Fair Project is trying to advance issues around data, and particularly fair data. Next slide then, please. Oh, we skipped one. Yep. In terms of things that are happening in CoData coming up, we have our General Assembly in October. There will be elections of officers and also task group voting. So CoData runs projects in a range of task groups. So, for example, there's a task group on digital representation of units of measure, and another one around fair data for disaster risk research and similar kinds of things. Those are all approved by the CODATA General Assembly, and it defines where CODATA will be doing project work over the next 2 years or whatever. One of the key areas that is, and an ongoing task group that's been going since, in fact, the early 1960s, is the task group on fundamental physical constants. So one of the things that CODATA does is it provides, it stewards the data around the fundamental physical constants, making sure that those values that are used throughout physics and chemistry, and indeed in other areas as well, they are consensus values, and that the values that are used for those constants, and also the conversion factors that go between them, are all available and up to date. Another thing that's happening in terms of CODATA coming up is that there are expressions of interest going to be asked for the International Data Policy Committee. So if you have particular interests in that kind of field, there will be an announcement come out, and you should let me know actually if you have an interest there, because if you do, when I get when the expression of interest notification comes out, I'll make sure that it can be circulated to you if you do have some interest. So that's an encouragement to get in touch with me if you would like. Next slide, please, Nick. So this is my last slide. And it's highlighting the fact that in October 23rd to the 26th, we've got a major conference in the CODATA RDA World Data System World, International Data Week. It's a combination of the 21st RDA Plenary and SciDataCon, which itself is a collaboration between CODATA and the World Data System. If you're interested in things data, you should check out this conference as somewhere to go. It is a very interesting place where people from all sorts of different disciplines get together and can compare their issues in the data world. So you can, if you Google the IDW 2023, you'll get details on the link. There is a provisional program on the website, so you can see the sorts of things that are going there. Obviously, October is getting quite close, and it may be too close for you to think about maybe attending this edition of International Data Week. But the next one is in 2025 in Brisbane. And so I think people within the CODA forum, so this wider group that we've got, you may well want to consider planning ahead and getting involved in the 2025 edition of International Data Week. So that's my last slide. Quickly, I'll see if there's any questions, and then we'll move on to whoever's next. Was it going to be you, Nick, or is Kristen going?
Yeah, Kristen's next. So
Kristen's next, yeah. Okay. So quickly, are there any questions that people would like to ask around CODATA and that general background? Okay, so Kristen, yours.
Great, thanks. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so just an update on the World Data System. So you might be wondering, those of you who are not familiar with it, about all these different organizations and acronyms. So, it's a missing slide there. There it is. Okay. Yeah, so the World Data System, affiliated body of the International Science Council, its main role is to do with the repositories and data services side of open data and open systems. So, yeah, focusing on making data available through these repositories and all the things that go with that. And New Zealand is an associate member, so I'm the delegate. I took over just a couple of years ago from the previous person who'd been doing it for a long time. So the structure of it is there are mainly 4 sort of different subparts. The scientific committee, which is the governing body, which contains scientific experts from around the world, particularly who are focused on open data and open systems. And from New Zealand, we have Libby Liggins, who's from Massey, Auckland. She's a colleague of mine here. She joined the scientific committee last year, I think, and she had previously been recognised in the Data Stewardship Prize of the World Data System for her work with data sharing and open data. There's an international program office, which is sort of responsible for day-to-day operations and organises a lot of the meetings and promotions and so on. And they send out a newsletter every month, I think it is, which I circulate to anybody who's interested. I have a mailing list, so if anybody would like to join that mailing list, you could just put your email in the chat if you like, and then I'll add you to the list, and you'll get the newsletters every month. The Early Career Researcher Network has events and activities that they run, particularly focused, obviously, for early career researchers. The one that does a lot of the technical work is the International Technology Office. So I've got a little bit more information about some of their bigger projects. So one of the things they've been doing a lot of work is this polar search. So as most of you will know, when you're searching for papers, you end up going to all sorts of different repositories from different organisations and publishers and so on. So this is a sort of a pilot interface for federated search. So it's basically searching across many different repositories. I think there are 30 or so repositories, particularly in the North and South Pole, as a sort of a case study, really. So you can go and try that out. It's yeah, lets you do a search for something like, so nematodes is a sort of a creature that's in the Antarctica, I'm told. This is not my area, so I don't know. It's now going and searching across a lot of different repositories, and it brings back a sort of a aggregated list here. And as you can see, it's got a map, which I always like, being a map person. So it just lists them all. So this is yeah, some of the WDS work on repositories. They're also doing some work on Global Open Research Commons, which is basically looking at a set of services. So as well as actual tools and interfaces and the repositories, there's the services that glue them all together. So there's a bit of work going on in that through different working groups and committees, and then some work on virtual research environments, which are to do with being able to connect data sources and computational analysis tools, services again, and so on. So in terms of the geospatial domain, a lot of this is the components that you'll be familiar with from spatial data infrastructures. So bringing together systems for sharing. And there are a lot of events run by WDS. So this is one of the reasons why it's maybe of interest to get the newsletter if you're interested in open data and open systems, because you will then get regular updates on the events that are coming up. So they've had the Sustainability Summit in Tennessee yesterday and today, which is yeah, a lot of interesting events. But they also have these regular hackathons to do with the polar data. So that's the federated search I mentioned. And a lot of other webinars that are coming up regularly. So often on interesting topics. And Richard mentioned SciDataCon, which is part of International Data Week. They are having a day, particularly on the WDS Members Forum, where members can present work. So a lot of the members of WDS are organisations, and in fact, in New Zealand, the organisation is the Royal Society. who have asked me to be the delegate. So in New Zealand, we're not so much an organisationally aligned position, but a lot of the people involved are from specific organisations who are doing active projects. And so they will be presenting some of their work in that members forum. And on the subject of SciDataCon, if you do have an option to go, I can say that I've just come back from Salzburg, where I attended a conference at the same place as this one, and it was a really nice city to go to. It's a nice place to be, and so definitely highly recommend the experience of going to Salzburg for a conference if it's not too late, which it probably is for most people. But okay, so that's all I have, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. And otherwise I'll hand over to Nick.
Yeah, no, go for it, Nick. I think that's the next bit.
I'm mute.
You're muted, Nick.
Thanks, Kristen. That was really interesting to hear. And probably the new kid on the block is the Research Data Alliance. So this year, Research Data Alliance is celebrating a decade of data. So it's 10th year, and there's a lot of celebration going on this year. I'll talk very briefly about, for those who don't know about the RDA, what it is. It's much more, I think, of a grassroots organisation. It comes from an elective set of countries and institutions, communities, infrastructures from all around the world. And there's quite a lot of crossover, therefore, with both CODATA and the World Data System and WDS-ITO. If you want to learn a little bit more about the Research Data Alliance, because they've got this 10-year celebration going on this year, each month there's a range of events and activities which are really celebrating different thematic aspects of the work that's done within the RDA. The RDA itself is set up around a working group, an interest group structure. And so the way that work gets done, you end up looking at either a sort of an informal collegial group, where you look at a group that's actually working towards specific outcomes, and it's supported by an organisational advisory group. So the member organisations provide some governance over the way the RDA is operated, and it's also supported by a technical advisory board who provide a level of support and guidance and peer review, if you like, around the various technical or policy or other artefacts that are produced by the various working groups. I'll just show you very briefly something about those sort of outputs. So back last year, the RDA pulled together a card deck of all of the various outputs that had been produced. At this point, it was some 50 odd formalised outputs from the various working group structures. And the sorts of outputs you might get are quite specific. They address a particular challenge or problem that might be exhibited within a community, whether it's in the infrastructure or in the science area. So I'll just show you a couple of the cards. You can see here something around repository audit and certification catalogues, and they talk a little bit about what they're trying to do and what the impact is of the work that they've done. It might be more about scalable dynamic data citation methodologies. I'm not sure if any of you are interested in that topic or maybe even experts in it. But if you are, there's a global group of people who have worked hard over multiple years, have formulated a consensus view and put together a recommendation that's been endorsed by colleagues and is published as a standard or a recommendation in that particular area. And there's many of these working groups. They have a formalized process they go through, a life cycle, if you like, that ensures that they get through to a formal output that gets endorsed within their community. So you can learn a little bit more about all of those sorts of activities through looking at their decade of data events. One of the interest groups that I'm involved in, Kristen's already mentioned, it's been supported by the WDS ITO, the International Technology Office, the Global Open Research Commons interest group. And so you can see here the crossover between these different organizations and how they actually collaborate to achieve their outcomes. And here we're looking at, when you look at Open Research Commons, what are the sorts of things that we've learned globally about how you operate Open Research Commons? And what's the sort of advice or recommendation or guidance that we might provide to existing research commons or to emerging research commons as they get established, or as they do their reviews, or as they look at their performance, based on the sort of global collective knowledge about how these things operate and what the important aspects are to improve their performance and improve their impact. That's a very interesting group. The ITO support for that is just magnificent. The CJ out of the office there is incredible in terms of the support he gives. And this is, again, just one of those collegial groups where we're working through with a whole range of experience around the table, trying to understand how we can consolidate our knowledge and share it for wider application across research data communities globally. Again, if you want to learn more about these sorts of things, Salzburg turns out to be the place to be. So the three communities are coming together later this year. And the way that RDA members come together, there's two plenary meetings every year. So given the 10th year, we're into plenary 21 coming up in Salzburg. And there's pathways through those plenaries to give you a bit of a connection. If you're interested in data life cycles, then, for example, there's 16 meetings that you can go to, or 16 sessions you can go to. If you're more interested in data infrastructure, then just under 5% of the sessions are going to be focused around that. And this gives you a bit of a thematic way to think about connecting into the sessions. Or you could also just look at the sheer number of sessions that are talking about different topics. I think at IDW, there are a couple of sessions at least from within the region. And I know so some of you are looking to attend, which we'll look forward to hearing about after you've done so. So I think, Richard, that was all from me. Happy to take some questions about the Research Data Alliance, and happy for people to get in touch if they'd like to know more. Kia ora.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. I think we've got a question from Matthew there.
Yeah, kia ora, everyone. Yeah, look, I was really interested to hear these reports from these organisations, and reading through the some of the documentation that you sent through before, Richard. Just got me thinking, are there more organisations like this out there? I was trying to sort of get my handle on how they'd sort of come into being, and I know you mentioned that the CODATA was from the International Science Council. I think RDA sounds like it's come from maybe some governments actually originally. Is that right, Nick?
It was originally formed by 2 or 3 of the sort of data commons that were operating in different regions or nations, coming together, like the Australian National Data Service and some of their colleagues internationally. And they said, look, we're operating these national things. We want to share practice. We want to grow broader awareness around the sorts of initiatives we have to take nationally and how we can cross-fertilise globally.
Yeah. So just a sort of general comment. I mean, did the Royal Society of Te Parangi, do they indicate these are the organisations we should be focusing on? I think, Kirsten, you mentioned that they're already linked to WDS, right? So I don't know if this is a question or not, but just, you know what I mean? What other organisations are operating globally and internationally in this space?
Yeah, well, so perhaps I can talk a little bit about that kind of thing. I was just checking the participant list. I don't think we've got anything from the Royal Society Te Aoparangi with us. But basically, the Royal Society oversees most of the international memberships across all the different scientific disciplines and organizations through what they call the Catalyst Fund. The Royal Society doesn't so much drive that as they respond to areas of interest. So, for example, I think I could be wrong here, but I think the CODATA membership is relatively recent and was driven by an initiative from ME. But so I think what happens is that if you have a group within New Zealand who have identified an international body that is of interest, then they can approach the Royal Society and explore whether it's an appropriate membership to be paid for out of the Catalyst Fund. So essentially, this is a way to tie New Zealand people to international organizations, be it in science or indeed in other areas as well. So those international memberships are kind of run centrally, but they're driven by if you like some kind of grassroots need, whether it be organizational or individuals or collections of individuals. Yeah,
because it did seem like all these organizations sort of are aligned, but quite distinct in their focus, and so it seems like a good combination to be looking at.
Yeah, and the three organizations actually work together. I mean, it's quite clear from the International Data Week and so on that the three organizations are rather aware of each other and do collaborate quite significantly around these things. There are other bodies that pop up at times. So there's another group called Go Fair, which were largely funded by, largely came into being and are funded by the Netherlands government. And that ties into major research initiatives, and there are other sorts of things that come into being at times. So the three organisations we've talked about, I think they work well together because they're rather complementary. In that the CODATA is doing a lot of the science policy stuff, data policy stuff. WDS is focused much more around repositories and the things that are connected to that. And then RDA, I think Nick may elaborate a bit more, but I think you could think about RDA as much more of a grassroots organisation that are focused around dealing with pain points and other particular issues. And so those three things go together quite well. We could probably talk for ages about all of this sort of things, but yeah, it's a very good question. But I think it's worthwhile saying that the three organisations do work very closely together, and I think it's quite good that we have a forum here in New Zealand where we can bring people together from those different interest groups as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Any other general questions or things that are more specific to what we've done in those presentations? No. Okay. So. The next item on the agenda is tied to this committee and how we have a renewal process. So just to briefly give you some background, we actually formed about a year ago as a result of a process establishing what we wanted to be and how we were going to work about a year ago, over about 6 or 8 months before this time last year. So going back to, I don't know, November, December of 21. As part of that, we developed a set of terms of reference for this committee that essentially define how we operate, but more particularly, they contain a requirement that we actually stop and think about what we're doing and talk to the forum. Which is you all, and those hopefully that are part of the forum that will listen to the recording of the meeting afterwards. So we need to check in with you at least annually. And we also need to revise our membership, or at least ask for expressions of interest from the forum for those people who might like to join the committee and be part of the work that we're doing. according to the terms of reference, we're required to actually turn over a quarter of our membership each time. So we have 8 to 10 members. At the moment, it's 10. With actually Kristen kind of added in there because she's the WDS delegate. What our goal is to bring together a core group of people from all sorts of disciplines and organisations across the data world in New Zealand, so that we have some sort of sense of perspective of what's going on and the ability to try and do things to the advantage of the data community in New Zealand. Now, we had intended to be at a point where we wanted to renew the committee about now, but when we went out with our initial request for expressions of interest back in May, we didn't get many. And as a committee, we stopped and thought about why that was. And one of the reasons we considered was, firstly, it might have been a bad time of year. Sort of May, June is a bad time of year in terms of many organisations' budgetary processes and things like that. But also we realised that actually we had been so focused on doing some of the things to set up, like around the landscape project that Michelle will talk about shortly, that we had not really engaged with the forum as regularly as we should have, which then led to the idea that we should have this meeting and then reopen the expressions of interest process following this. So this is our notice to the forum, to the group that are here and those that are listening to the recording, that what we want to do, well, we will shortly be sending out a renewed request for expressions of interest to join the community. It's not intended that the committee will be representative in the sense of asking for somebody from this organisation, that organisation, or that type, but we want it to be representational in the sense that we want a set of individuals who collectively cover a lot of those sorts of things. So we're hoping to have people from CRIs, from universities, from the private sector. Our first edition of the committee had had early career researchers as well, and we would want to continue doing that. And the idea is that we have a core group that can deal with a lot of the business and can engage with things, but that we can also work with the wider forum at times when we're doing projects and so forth. We hope to have more projects running, for example, and that would be a way that we can engage with more people. So in terms of schedule, shortly we'll send out the renewed expressions of interest. And depending on when exactly that happens, we'll set a time when a closing date. We'll have some time to evaluate that, and then the current edition of the Committee on Data will come back to the forum with a proposal for the new membership based on those expressions of interest, trying to pull together a combination that covers as many of the things that we believe are important to the committee. So that's broadly the outline, and I think now is probably a good time for me to shut up and see if there are any questions or thoughts around all of that. And then after that, we'll get on to some of the issues and initiatives that the committee is looking at. So any questions, thoughts, worries, ideas?
Seems sensible to me, Richard.
No, well, thank you, Matthew. It's good to have some input, yeah. So with that, I will move on to the next. Well, I'll say that you're more than welcome to send me a message if something does occur to you or things that are going on, and hopefully we will be able to involve many more people a bit more actively in more projects and get greater engagement with the committee as well. Part of that greater engagement idea is the next item on the agenda, is that we are thinking actively about the idea of having a greater involvement in the eResearch series of conferences. So I'll just warn Nick, I'm probably going to ask Nick to say something more about those conference shortly. What happened was that as part of the landscape project that you'll hear about shortly, we were wanting to consult with people in the data world And it became obvious that the eResearch 2023 conference that was held at the University of Waikato in February was a good opportunity to run some workshops to engage with people in our community of interest to get a better sense of the data landscape and people's views of the data landscape in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so there were several of us from the committee who were at that conference, and it was really neat to see the range of people that were there, but it also looked like it might represent an opportunity for us because that conference has two broad themes. One's around infrastructure. Well, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Nick and let him talk about the eResearch conference a little bit, but the basic idea is we wondered whether CODA as a group and the wider forum may be able to provide a third strand to that conference. So Nick, maybe you should take over here because you know a lot more about it than me.
Kia ora, Richard, thank you. Look, I'll just take a moment. I'll put a plug in for the conference just so everyone knows when it's coming. It's in February at the moment. It's been in February for a while. So next year is in Wellington. The conference started, I started it in 2010 because I saw there was a space where we were operating, looking at the sort of digital practice around research and e-research, where there was no natural place to convene. You could maybe have give a talk or if you're really lucky, have a session at a disciplinary conference, but it wasn't sort of mainstream to be talking about the sort of change in digital practice across research. And so we convened the first one in 2010 in Auckland, and it was really a melting pot of all sorts of different disciplines, all sorts of different practice areas, infrastructures, tools, policy, really looking at the effect of digital practice in a research setting. So it's sponsored by REANZ, our Research and Education Advanced Network, by Genomics Aotearoa, and by NESI. And we rotate around the hosting of it. So REANZ is the host for next year. There's no website just yet, as it says on the picture, coming soon. So there's the date. And I think at this point, there's probably a couple of things that I think we'd want to do, Richard. One of them is just to encourage people to think about this as a place where we can convene. And so, whether it's making submissions or even just coming along. But the other one is looking at connections into the program committee as that takes shape. And obviously with the three organisations, with REANZ, NESI and Genomics Aotearoa, we're connected into the organising committee and the program committee, and so we can make sure that there's discussions, open discussions, and an invitation coming out if we haven't got that participation right. The event itself as well was spun up around the same time that the eResearch Australasia event was created in Australia. And so that's an event that falls a little bit later in the year. It's coming up in a few months' time. And that's that's the big sister. That's it's probably four times the scale, and talks about similar things. So there's a nice cadence across the year actually within the region of these two meetings, talking about these areas of practice and these interests, and then talking a lot about these are not academic conferences, so they really are practice-focused conferences that are there to share practice and to share learnings. So it's mostly about coming along and sharing your experiences and sharing your pain points and trying to embrace the learning that goes along with that. And I can see a few attendees here today with us, which is wonderful. So that's probably all from me, Richard, unless there's something else you want me to talk to about that.
No, that's fine. I think as a new person at the eResearch conference, I'd say that, the two broad themes that were there this year was the infrastructural sort of side of things and then the bioinformatics kind of side of things. And that's why I kind of viewed the idea or thought about the idea that Coda could have sort of a third stream, which was around whatever we wanted to make of it, and go from there. But at least to sort of broaden things a little bit, or to provide, well, it represents an opportunity to bring some people together from all sorts of different areas in data who are doing research in New Zealand, and to maybe share experiences and see where we might go a little bit. So I'm putting that out there.
I think it's been interesting over time, given the time frame we've been operating the conference. At various times we've had different groups come in, but it typically might be one passionate individual, like a Michelle Blake comes in and says, okay, I'm going to bring the librarians along, and we'll get a year or two where we get this really good turnout by the librarians. And at another point in time, it's a Ben Taylor, and he says, look, I'm going to bring all the CIOs from the CRIs along, and we'll get this big influx of CIOs from CRIs. And it's starting to stabilize a bit, but it would be really great to see a much more consistent participation and representation from the broader church. I think that would be a really powerful way that we could convene as a sector around these areas. So fully agree, Richard. It would be wonderful.
Okay, any other thoughts from those on the call?
So it's about 150 to 170, unless something happens like a cyclone, in which case it might drop down by about a third.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nick. And yes, we did drop down by about a third. But what I'll say is that, as I kind of alluded to before about my general experience in coming into the data community as a chemist, one of the brilliant parts about this was that I got to engage with a community that was not at all like the group that I normally deal with. And those new perspectives and ideas are incredibly powerful and eye-opening. And I want to kind of advertise the general idea of that to you all, even if not the specific ideas of a specific thing of this conference or even the Committee on Data. So I'm going to leave that there, but I think the one of the key things around data is it does go across all sorts of disciplines, and we tend to be very discipline specific. And so reaching out to people across other disciplines can be tremendously educational and fulfilling. So excellent. Right. Moving on. The Committee on Data, actually, when it first started, it had identified that there was a key need in New Zealand to understand more about what our data landscape looked like. And in fact, it transpired that MB were very interested in that as well. And so we started a project, and Michelle Blake is going to tell us more about that project and where we've got to around this whole process. So where you go, Michelle?
Kia ora, Richard, thank you. So I think probably most people on here have heard about the project, but just a little reminder that, as Richard said, it's around mapping the research data landscape in Aotearoa, New Zealand. What we said, that I took this out of what we said we would do with MB, so this is what we told them that we were going to do. So it would cover many aspects of the research data in New Zealand, identifying challenges and opportunities, and would include in its scope the interface between Māori data sovereignty, Mātauranga Māori, and research data. So you will see that there's, that is probably what sets the work that we're doing apart from some of the work that has taken place in other jurisdictions across the world as well. So I thought it might just be useful to show a kind of overall timeline. And the work on this actually started well before October 2022, because obviously we were approaching MB and talking to them after we even had the original idea. And I think that was not long after the group kind of established, Richard. So, around the start of last year, when we started talking about the potential to do a piece of work like this. So we were able to get MB funding, as Richard said, and that allowed us to be able to appoint Regina, who's on the call, who many of you, I'm sure, have met because you've probably been in engagement opportunities with her for this project. And she's undertaking the work for us and is based at Waikato here with me, which is great, and with Tahu, who's not on the call today. So essentially where we're up to at the moment, I'll talk a little bit about the engagement work that we've done and those engagement opportunities, just to show kind of how wide ranging they've been. We're also, at the moment, we're in the process of the drafting of that. So Regina's very busy doing a lot of writing at the moment, with an expectation that we'll be looking to have that final report kind of published towards the end of August, really is what we're aiming for, and then to start a whole load of outreach. So one of those, I would imagine Richard would be doing a session back to the forum, for example, a presentation about the report itself. Sorry, slides isn't working. There we go. So I thought it was really helpful just to kind of put in context the amount of engagement that we have done for this project, because I think we all felt we really needed to make sure we were talking to the people who are part of the landscape here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and informing the work that we're doing in that way. So we started off with that landscaping kind of hui back in June 22 to do some pre-thinking. As Richard already mentioned, the eResearch conference earlier this year in February was really key for us, and it was a great opportunity to engage with you know, a variety of people in this space. And what that really led us to, as we also heard there was a cyclone, so some of the people who might have been able to join us were not able to join us. So we did realise that we needed to think about how we were going to do some of that engagement, and that led us to do some topic specific engagement. And I've got another slide on that I'll show and just cover off as well. Regina also ran some specific workshops with some groups as well. So Te Mana Raranga around the Māori data sovereignty, and also with the CRIs themselves, that basically came about and was really useful, because when we ran these topic specific workshops, the CRIs felt that actually they weren't able to attend enough of those. So it meant that we could engage with them specifically and make sure that we were really that what we had found we were able to present back to them, and just I guess triangulate that their experience was either the same or it wasn't, and to allow us to pick up any things that we were missing as well. So as I said, we had those topic specific engagements as well, those workshops that we ran back in March and April, and they were over a kind of 2-week period. So it was quite sort of intense for those 2 weeks, but it was hugely beneficial for us in terms of the project, and we learned you know, a huge amount during that time, and that's really helped us in terms of starting to think about the shape of the report that we're going to be doing. So really, I'm not going to spend a load of time on this. I just thought it might be useful for people to get a kind of overall understanding of the sort of outline of that draft report. And of course, within that, there is a whole load of a kind of literature review piece, looking at what else has happened in other jurisdictions. So, for example, in Canada. There is then, you know, a large section obviously on Te Tiriti and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and what makes us different and unique here. And then some of the headings you'd probably be expecting around data management, data infrastructure and systems, research data cultures, and really thinking around what are those key questions arising, and the considerations that we're going to have. And we're going to be checking in with MB very shortly and presenting to them about where we've got to, just to make sure they don't feel that we're missing anything from the work that we've put together so far. And as I say, then we will be expecting the finalised report to kind of be published around the end of August. So I thought I would stop there, because I thought there may well be questions that people have got on this work, and Regina's on the call as well. So if there are things that people want to know, you know, any one of us very happy to answer any questions that people have got.
Thank you, Michelle. So questions?
Sorry, I may have been distracted, so if you've answered this, I apologise. Will we get a to be able to view the draft report and provide feedback just to as part of the process?
So that wasn't the intention for it to go around everyone. So what we had said to MB was it was kind of key stakeholders, which realistically is MB because they're funding it, obviously, which is quite important. And we've got the committee themselves. So the CODA committee will be obviously reviewing it as well. Richard, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to pick up on that one.
Well, what I would say is that if there's anybody in the forum
Can't hear
who
you,
are
but I'm not sure why.
Oh, I'm
I
not
can hear you.
muted. Yep, no, okay. Others can hear me, so
It's not just me that can't hear Richard. Please, someone tell me that it's not me alone.
no.
I can hear Richard.
I think it's just you.
It's just me. Oh no.
Okay, so what I would say to the wider forum, and I'll tell Michelle about later, is that I think if there are members of people on the call who are interested to see the draft and would like to comment, then if you get in touch with us, we can bring you into the fold as part of that process. I think we have to respect the fact that MB are the funding body and we're doing the work essentially for consulting for them, but they are also talking to us as the Committee on Data, and we have a wider forum, and they know that. So I think that those who are interested and want to, if you contact us, we will find a way for you to get a look at what's going on.
Kia ora, Rochelle. I'm James Savage, and I'm the research coordinator down in SIT, part of Te Pūkenga now. I just wondered whether you managed to get any input from Te Pūkenga on that project, because I feel like I'm fairly well connected within the Te Pūkenga network with all of our research directors and everything. I don't remember hearing anything about it from them. So I just wondered, obviously very busy time for us for various reasons, with all of our merging and restructuring and everything, but just curious whether you managed to get any input from any parts of our network.
Good question, James. I'm looking at Regina. I don't personally remember anyone from Te Pūkenga, but obviously Regina was in all the workshops.
I don't remember anyone specifically speaking up that they were from there. However, I am not, there may be someone from there that I was not aware of because I didn't look at every name on the workshops. So yeah, I'm not sure if we did or did not, unfortunately.
James, if you think it would be useful, I'm sure Regina would be happy to kind of just have a conversation with you as well, and just make sure that there's, from your point of view, that there's any issues that you're particularly concerned about and things or would want to raise.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Obviously, individually, the various now business divisions likely probably wouldn't have sent someone. I kind of half expected someone to come along somewhere, but obviously everyone's been very distracted this year, so I wouldn't be surprised. I think that would be a good idea, and if I could certainly share any comments or questions or solicit questions from our research directors forum. We won't have a unified Te Pūkenga research structure for a while yet, but I can share that with the relevant people and see if we can get any feedback from there as well.
Oh, well, thank you, James. That's very helpful. I mean, I think one of the purposes of providing this report to the forum is to have a second check-in, if you like, that we haven't missed anything obvious, and it may be that we have got something we can do usefully there to enhance the report. So if you can help us make the right connections there, James, I think that's very helpful and very timely given where we are in the project. So these kinds of things, but this is exactly what the forum and the communication with the forum is meant to achieve. Sorry, you can see that the clouds have just moved away and I'm getting blinded by the sun coming in the windows, and I can tell you it's an old office and the blinds don't work. So I'm just warming up now. So I apologize. I'm going to look like I'm saluting to you for a little while. But thank you, James. And I think Regina will probably be in touch with you and we'll set something up, whether that's just with you or whether in fact it evolves into a subsequent session with a small group of people you connect with. That's something that will be dependent on how you and Regina carry on the conversation. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Are there any other comments about the landscape project?
Yeah, I might just chip in here, just to say thanks really, Regina, because I was in that workshop with the CRIs just a couple of days ago. And yeah, Michelle, you hit the nail on the head when you said we were a bit, I don't know, caught a bit slow off the mark for those subject workshops, and we couldn't attend and give our input as we feel like we could. So it was really awesome to have our own little workshop organised. I think we probably found it quite wide-ranging discussion, and I can see why your subject workshops would have been really useful for focusing in. I'm also one of the members of the CRI Data Managers Group, and I think if we were to get a chance to look at a draft, it might be, we'd really appreciate filling in the gaps from a CRI perspective. So yeah, either myself or one of the others might get in touch. If you think that's reasonable, then we'd appreciate that. But thanks to Rogita for the other day. It's really good.
Yeah, well, I think the situation is, as I said before, that if we have individuals from the forum who are willing to contribute on a fairly short turnaround, I mean, we don't want to get into sort of major consultations and second phase writing and stuff like that. What we want to do is to make sure that we're not missing big holes and yeah, making sure that we are getting important stuff in the right places. So perhaps even Bridget, you or one of the other coordinators of that group will presumably be in touch with us, and we'll get on to that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll do that.
So let us know who you think we should talk to as being the first point of contact, and we can work on it from there.
We'll do.
Okay.
Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. Any other comments on the landscape project and where we're at? No? Okay, so item 5 on the agenda is other projects. What I would say here is firstly that we're very open to receiving ideas on things that should be done in the data space in New Zealand. So if you believe that there are areas of work that might be desirable, we would be very open to providing an umbrella under which that sort of work can be done. And so please do get in touch with us about your idea. We currently have a couple of ideas that are in the formative stages, or well, actually reasonably well involved, and we're actually in the process of trying to work out how we're going to get funding to get them done. One of those is around research data management planning. The general idea behind that project is to provide some kind of critical assessment or advice in a New Zealand context about what good ways to do research data management planning might be, and how that might work, and the sorts of things that we should look for, particularly in our context. So we're looking to pull together some of the ideas that we had seen, for example, through the eResearch conference, and to provide some advice to people who might be in looking at research data management planning and what might be needed in order to do that properly. So for example, one of the things that came up through the eResearch conference was just the concept that a research data management plan should really be a living document rather than something that's done as part of a funding application and then quietly shelved. That there are key points throughout a project where it is advisable and probably necessary to go back to the plan and check in on the things that are there and whether they're still valid, and what new things needed to be dealt with, and to consider how the plan should change as a project evolves through its life cycle, because research projects do change, and things are adjusted to account for what actually happens, and we may want different advice around that. The other project, which I might even hand over to Nick about, is around research data culture, and it does have some overlaps with some aspects of the data management planning things, but Nick, with that very small or very short lead in, perhaps you'd like to share a few words about the culture project idea.
Yeah, I'm going to provide an even shorter lead in to Claire Rye to hand over, sorry, to give us the lead in. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko Claire Rye tuku ingoa. Thanks, I'm Claire Rye. So I work with Nick and was given a moment's more notice about talking about this today. So thank you. So I think the Research Data Culture Conversation has been a project that's come out of Australia over about the last 5 years. And it's come out from the idea that institutions are getting more and more data, and the worry is that growth is going to be exponential, and at some point infrastructure can't account for that, and what are we going to do with all this data? And it's come from some really interesting kind of fundamental, apparently simple questions like, how much data do we have? How much research data does each institution actually have? And kind of attempting to answer that year on year. And there's been some quite interesting findings. Some of it links back to research data management planning and you know, the sort of typical static document that actually doesn't then allow us to look at decision points or have automated provisioning of anything, or look at the services that are actually required for that. And it also has kind of come up with, I guess, an idea about the kind of the yin and yang of data. The yin being the sharing, the preservation, the reuse, which gets a lot of conversation, particularly in, I guess, discipline-specific areas and in repositories. You know, it's all about data sharing, data preservation, and I guess the yang of data, which is often the resourcing of it, the sensitivity and the end of life. Actually deleting data is something that no one likes to talk about and no one wants to do, but kind of needs to be a balance between the two. So we have, I guess, been interested in this conversation for the last 6 months or so. We similarly had a workshop at eResearch NZ to try and build a little bit more conversation about what we might do in New Zealand, and we had some help from Ben Taylor and others to put together some workshops and look at quantifying, you know, what research data we could, and we could get to answers like total volume, but we couldn't get to accessibility or sensitivity or anything like that. So I think the aim over the next few months is to really build that out and try and look at all institutions in New Zealand. So I guess this is a call out that I might come knocking on your door soon, to try and get that quantification and look to see if we can provide a baseline as to, can we answer the question, how much data do we have, and the subtleties within that. So things like classification, and also sort of a Maori data sovereignty aspect as well. So I think that's the 5-minute version. I guess, does anyone have any questions?
No, lovely. Thank you, Claire. That's great. I probably should have gone straight to you, obviously, but so that's on me. But you know, Nick's a good first 5 and going straight on to the second 5/8. So we're good to go. Okay. Any comments? No? No? Okay. What I would say is that if people are interested or intrigued by that, they should get in touch, because we, and Claire in particular, might embrace co-conspirators with some alacrity. How about that? Yeah. Good to have a team going. So if some of those thoughts appeal and something that you would like to get into, then please let us know, and we will try and link you up so that we can get something involving, you know, a wider group perhaps as well. Okay. I could perhaps have a call if anybody is thinking about any other projects and you want to mention them now. It would be really fantastic. But we could even do that under any other business, which is the next and last item on the agenda. Basically, the intent there is to provide an opportunity for those in the forum to ask questions about things we've covered. comment on things that we could cover next time, or maybe even help us out with any of the things we've talked about through the meeting today. So the floor is open basically to anybody who would like to raise something in relation to CODA or wider data issues.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ben from DRNZ. Claire, your last little bit at the end, I know it was sort of off the cuff, but I help facilitate a sort of a community, in our community at DRNZ, and we've had Ben Taylor speak before. But I was wondering perhaps if you might be interested in coming along and sharing at one of those events about that project, you know, and understanding data. Like, as an organization, we have huge amounts of data going back ages, and no one wants to chuck anything out, but also at the same time, you know, there's stuff on paper, stuff in the cloud, and because some of it's generated by scientists, they can be a bit more attached than other data series. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation that we're going through.
Absolutely, yeah, I would love to be a part of it, and yeah, definitely, it's there's quite a lot of complexities, right? So and a lot of different stakeholders with different views. So yeah, that sounds good.
Brilliant. Could you just pop your email address in the chat then?
Yep.
Cheers.
No, fantastic. It's good. We made another link. That kind of thing justifies this meeting, if nothing else. Okay, any other comments or other business? In that case, what I will do is I will draw this meeting to a close. Thank you for giving us an hour and a bit of your valuable time. I do hope that you'll be encouraged enough to engage with us in the future and perhaps to get involved in some of our projects, or certainly to consider putting in an expression of interest in being a member of the committee as well. So thank you all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Richard.
Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Bye. Bye, everyone.